before we dive into our episode today, we want to take a moment to remind you how important it is for you to rate us, please.
And tell your friends. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our bonus episode. As we discussed in the full recap of the Last Voyage of the Pong Su, there was a lot to discuss in the 9 episodes. They were long, and there was just a lot of information. And we did do a detailed overview of what happened in each episode, but we didn't feel like it made sense to put it in the full recap. So we've decided to split it, and that's what this bonus episode is all about. If you are looking for the full recap where we are discussing our thoughts and opinions on the series as a whole, please go back to the full recap of The Lost Pong Su in your feed. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy our overview of The Last Voyage of the Pong Su. All right, Jeff, this is the most episodes we've recapped so far this season. So I think today the best thing to do is go episode by episode and give a high level overview, some interesting points per episode, and then we'll dig into like how we felt.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right. Episode 2, Master Sun's Big Gamble. Just to remind you, Master Sun is the skipper of the Pong Su. So Jeff, tell me your summary.
All right. So episode 2 is basically about how the Pong Su got from North Korea to Australia. And then we also hear a little about how the feds were watching this onshore trio of Lam, Tang, and Lee. That's my summary.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. I think that's a really good summary of the main things that we hit. It's kind of interesting to hear of like the Pong Su and its journey and like leaving the shipping lanes at one point as it approaches Australia. I found that kind of interesting to listen to. The other thing I have written down. Sorry, were you going to say something there?
Well, yeah. I was going to jump in and just say, yeah. So just the ship kind of follows like at times like a normal cargo ship. It goes to China, then it goes back to North Korea. At some point, Wong and his friend join the ship. They go near Singapore. They go near Jakarta. They're carrying like a load of feldspar, which is one of those words I don't hear very much, but I always love the word feldspar.
And then they stop for is it called a convenience flag?
Flag of convenience. Yes.
Flag of convenience.
Did you know what this was?
No idea. That was really interesting.
I didn't know either. I had to look this up. Do you want to explain it or do you want me to?
So you explain it because you looked it up.
I went to the Wikipedia page for flags of convenience.
I mean, it's more than I did.
I mean, I guess the best way of saying it is there's some countries that basically will, I presume, sell. I was going to say loan.
Oh, it was sell. Yeah, it was like 11 grand or something.
Yeah, this is a purchase agreement. You can buy their flag so that your ship can carry the flag of that country. If your country is maybe problematic, maybe your country isn't welcome in certain waters. So they get this one from Tuvalu, which...
Never heard of before.
Nope, but apparently they sell their flag. And then this is also where once they get this flag, they also they paint over the name of the ship. Just basically disguise that they're North Korean. And they also stay out of the shipping lanes, like you mentioned before, which is something that as a person who doesn't spend a lot of time on cargo ships, I don't usually think about, but most of these ships do follow the same shipping lanes. Like they're following, I think they're following the currents, right? Like there's just certain routes in the ocean. I'm talking out of my ass now.
I mean, it sounds accurate. I thought some other interesting points that we got here was hearing about Master Sun, the captain, and just like this is likely his final journey before retirement, and it would have paid quite a lot of money. And talking about
one last job.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of grandkids, and like on the journey over through Singapore and all the other places they stopped, he wanted to buy like presents for his grandkids and stuff like that. And he was dying to get back to his grandchildren and to just be with his family. And I loved that aspect of it.
Yeah, and that was, I think, kind of balanced our in addition to that, we learned a little bit about why these men might end up on this ship. Or that they would make
so fascinating. Yeah,
so these men would make $500 a month to work on this ship. So, and you contrast that with, they talked about how there's, at different times there have been these hundreds of thousands of people dying of starvation in North Korea, but on the ship they have tons of food. They're fed really well, right? So like the appeal of this, it's in such stark contrast to life in North Korea.
I did think it was interesting in this episode when they were like, wait till you hear the like list of food on board, and it starts listing off all this food, and I'm like, this is so hard to like compare to, because you're talking about so many like crew members on the ship for so long. So like the list of food and the quantities of it, I think we're supposed to sound like a lot, but to me it didn't like hit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
it didn't necessarily sound like too much food if they're going to be on the ship for like a long time. Do you know what I mean?
I guess so. I mean, I think in contrast, and this is where I think I mentioned this last episode, like from what I've read a couple of books about life in North Korea, and I mean, there's literally people who are just starving, right? Like it's really dire conditions for a lot of people in North Korea. So just knowing that you're having a steady like access to food on this boat, I think was really appealing.
Yeah, I didn't care for the list because it just didn't do anything for me. I did like to hear, like I found it interesting. I should say at the start of this, now I know next to nothing about North Korea. So I found certain pieces of this podcast really interesting. The way it was mentioned, like that the men on this ship, the crew members, for them to leave North Korea, like this is like a pretty amazing opportunity because it's not something most of the population get to do. I thought that was fascinating. For someone who knows a lot about North Korea, I'm sure you're like, well, duh, Dee, of course this is like a thing. But like, I was like, wow, I've never really, I wouldn't have thought about it from that point of view before.
Yeah, I mean, one of the so we're gonna move along to more episodes, but this is really the one episode that spends, I think, the most time on North Korea, and I think this is pretty important just to get a sense of who these people were, what they were coming from, why they would do this, why they would risk so much to do this. So one of the books I wanted to mention that I read was called "The Girl with Seven Names," subtitles of North Korean defector stories. So there's this whole like subgenre of, or I guess it's a genre of books written by people who defected. Right, we hear from a couple of those people in this podcast. But yeah, there's a bunch of really, I think, interesting books. This one, The Girl with Seven Names, is specifically about someone who's from sort of an upper class background. But even for her, the description in the book of basically how difficult it was to get out, like how basically, I mean, you're essentially trapped in this country. So for these guys to have this opportunity to get on a boat, to go see other parts of the world, to really just set foot outside of North Korea is really remarkable. And it's like, I just don't know of any other place like that, right? Like it's so unusual how trapped people are in this country.
It also posed the question at this juncture in the podcast. Like, so the idea is that North Korea had an international shipping company, which seems weird. Again, I don't know much about North Korea, but that seems weird. And the fact that the crew were allowed to leave seems weird.
Well, I think they were just allowed to leave because they had a job to do, right? Like, and we're going to get into how they were allowed to leave, but they were under watch, right? Like,
yes,
they were
and we will get
watched.
into that. But like, they were just some things that like stuck in my head as I was reading this. Like, I was like, wait a second, my understanding, again, it's limited. But yeah, I think that there's nothing else really from episode 2 I think we need to discuss.
No, let's go on to episode 3. So episode 3 is called Going Fishing. Do you want to give your summary of this one?
My summary is literally, we hear some recorded tapes from inside the rental car of the onshore crew.
Yeah. Also, in addition to that, my summary includes the feds watch them smoke and the feds eat 7-Eleven food.
That's basically what this is. Some of the things that I found really interesting here have really nothing to do with the plot points, but the fact that the Australian police, when they've like a whole a new case that they need to give a name to, it's just like put into a random name is like generated, like the random name generator we might use, as an icebreaker or whatever. So it's called Operation Sorbet. Like, there's no basis of this other than it's like a random generation.
Yeah,
I think that was very funny. Des is back. And Celeste is also here. She's the one that received the tip about the boat. The Pong Su.
Yes.
The boat. It's like, it's not a boat.
It's a boat.
And then, yeah, so there's a bug in the rental car. So you're able to hear footage. Now, I presumably we're hearing the footage, but it's obviously not spoken in English. So we're hearing an actor like translate it in English over it. Very interesting.
One of the things I thought was most interesting about that, well, two quick things. One was Lee, who seems to be sort of the leader, wonders aloud, or he's talking aloud about it. Their car can't possibly be bugged. Only the FBI can bug their car, which the Australian feds are like, that's great. We love it when they sort of underestimate what we can do.
And also love that, like, this is confirmation that something shady is going down. If they're
Right?
like, yeah.
And then the other thing is that they're speaking. So yeah, like you mentioned, we're hearing actors recreate what's being said in English, but the feds have to have what they're bugging be translated. And it's not just translated from one language. Like, they're speaking in multiple languages because these folks aren't just all, these guys aren't all from North Korea, right? Like, I think one's from Malaysia or maybe Singapore. Like, they're speaking in different languages. And so there's this delay, right? Like, I think I was thinking of like these movies where you have like, you know, the police listening to the wiretap and they're just like being able to react in real time. But they can't react in real time. They have to wait for it to go get translated and then come back to them. And that takes sometimes a while.
Yeah. I really found that fascinating as well. Again, I wouldn't have kind of twigged that would be something that they'd have to wait for. And obviously nowadays you wouldn't, like, because there'd be software to like just translate it as you go. But yeah, that was really interesting. I also enjoyed hearing, like, so they're speaking about the heroine, but the heroine's dubbed the girlfriend and the Pong Su is dubbed the boyfriend. Pong Su are called the boyfriend, which is just I just found that interesting. And then, yeah, April 15th, 2003, the Pong Su is seen off the coast of Lorne on the Wye River, or at the Wye River, and this is 8 hours before things kick off.
All right. Should we go on
the
to 4?
other thing before we leave 3,
okay.
Dickie is back at the end of episode 3. He's like, why Buckley Creek? Sorry, Dickie, that was a terrible Australian accent. But he's also like, what are they doing? Like, why would they choose here? And also, why not enlist a local if you're going to do this here? And I just thought that was so funny. Like, because the last time he was basically like, I'd love to find the extra heroin because then I'd no longer be a carpenter. And now he's like, why not enlist a local? Very funny.
He's offering his services, character. I think.
I know. Gas character. I love the way he just pops up all the way through. Okay. Episode 4. Do you believe in luck? This was very tense, I found.
Yeah. Well, this and the next one, 4 and 5, were probably to me like the
yes.
excitement peak of the series.
So 4 I have tense, and for 5 I have very tense.
All right. Well, let's do these in sequence. So 4 is basically the night of the heroin transfer, the feds on the hunt, and Lee and Teng getting caught with 50 kilograms of some of the heroin, not all of it. And then I think this one this one Wong gets caught in the end, just by himself.
Yeah. So it's like we were seeing the handover from both sides, and there's like kind of a focus on how like luck played a part for both sides. You know, there was like this whole thing about the police are tailing Teng and Lee, and they lose them. So then they're trying to find them again. And they're waiting at a roundabout, and as they're waiting, they're like, oh, the next car that comes up, we're just going to practice like pulling out and like tailing them just so we know exactly how to do it. And the car comes up and they pull out and tail them, and they're like, that's them. Like, that happened to be them right in front of them. So I thought that was like kind of gas, but like the whole luck thing was an interesting but probably weak like trying to merge, like to give a common thread running through this episode. So I feel like they were trying to bring luck and like create luck as like the common thread in this episode. And I feel like it was just a bit of a stretch. Like they were like, Celeste is lucky. When Celeste does this, she's lucky. And look, we were lucky when Tang and Lee like pulled in front of us.
Yeah, that was a bit of a...
Other people
yeah,
were lucky.
forced.
It was all this like, I don't know. Lamb.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Can I say, though, the opposite of luck, I feel like, is Des. Des, I feel like, is constantly talking about his fun plans getting foiled, right? At the beginning of this, they were about to basically say, like, look, we've been on this stakeout. We've been eating 7-Eleven food. We're going to make this reservation for this French dinner. But then the heroin drop is happening, so they have to abandon that. And then they go through the whole chase.
Did you love his sentence?
What was his sentence?
I believe I ate pizza that night. No French meal for me.
Yeah. Oh, Des. And then Des ends up in this hotel room with, what's it, like 5 guys, 3 in the bed, 2 on the couch. But Des has his radio constantly going off. So those other 4 guys are like, you got to get out of here. And he has to go sleep in his car. Funny. I mean, they say at least he gets to see the Ocean Road sunrise. And then they are like, all right, well, Lee and Tang have their 50 kilograms of hair. Well, they don't know what they have exactly yet, but they know they basically took something and they went back to their hotel so Lee and Tang could get some sleep. And they're like, all right, let's flatten their tire so that when they come out, we'll grab them then. But they just...
This was a great plan.
I thought it was a good plan, but they just drive off with the flat tire. So again, that foiled Des getting breakfast, I think.
Yeah.
He's just
not allowed to eat.
He can't get a meal break. Like,
no.
This guy never, if this guy ever invites you out for like a reservation, just, it's not going to work out. Yeah.
Say no, get away, tell someone. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of gas. And then at the end, so they've got divers in looking to see if they can get anything else from the sea. They found the dead body on the beach and they've got the men in custody. And then who's this guy that finds
Tim
one?
James. Tim James.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim James with the nose like a dog. Like,
yeah.
He's like, I smell something. And he's like wandering around.
He's wandering around, yeah, like in the shrub or whatever, like, and he smells body odor.
Like, it's so sad that that's what gives you away.
It really is. But then he's like, he doesn't have a gun, and there's this really like weirdly comic scene where he's like trying to use hand signals to signal to the divers who are just like lounging around.
So we didn't say that Tim was like an ex like special forces guy?
I think so, yeah.
So like he knows all the signals and like he's like, I was like signaling to my chin because he has a beard and I was like signaling to whatever.
Make like a gun sign, like that he needs a gun. And they're like, he found Santa Claus? I don't like... That was great. Anyway, he ends up getting a gun and finding Wong, who is not really putting up any fight. Like Wong is hungry and scared and seemingly kind of grateful to just have this ordeal over with at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some interesting things, like there was a GPS found on him. A rubber band was holding up. His trousers were held up by like rubber tubing, and it matched the same thing that the heroin was wrapped in.
Right. All right. Should we roll into episode 5?
Hot pursuit, very tense is what I've written.
I wrote just chase at sea. That's my summary.
Okay. So it was very detailed. I felt like sometimes it was a bit too technical for me. It's a very detailed, sometimes too technical description of the Pong Su running away and the chase that ensued. Sorry. Like Pong Su ensued. Sorry.
Okay.
When caught, we get some idea of the level of fear and loyalty that the crew felt to the leaders, be it the captain on the ship or back in North Korea.
There's some amazing details. This was my favorite episode, I think.
This was great.
I want to talk a little bit about several things that happen here. I think the first thing I want to talk about is at the beginning of the episode, the feds are like, we got to go chase this ship. We don't have a boat. Let's commandeer this fisherman's boat. And there's this great back and forth where they're like, the fisherman's like, all right, yeah, take my boat. And they're like, well, there might be a bit of gunplay. And he kind of pauses for a second. The fisherman's like, no, that's still good. That's
so
to me, that was like, so, I don't know. That was great. I love that. And then as they're chasing the Pong Su, as it's kind of doing this like zigzag out to sea thing, they're tossing over stuff. Like the Pong Su crew is trying to basically destroy any evidence. And one of the things they find is some pirated DVDs in the water. I'm just wondering, like, what do you think those movies were? Like, what were the DVDs?
I don't want to know. I find it interesting that the rubber ducky changes everything because
like basically, yeah, it gives them the right to go after the ship. Like it's almost like probable cause. Like it's
yeah, I found that fascinating though.
And then we get Tim Curtis, who this guy. So he is he's an SAS soldier, and what do you know about the SAS?
Nothing.
Basically, like special forces. Do you know who also, a fictional character who was also part of the SAS? Alfred Pennyworth from Batman. Batman's butler, former SAS. Yeah.
Oh,
that's why he's so useful to Batman. Because Batman's just this rich dude.
When did we realize that? When were we told that?
Paxton told me that, like, before I came in this room. Paxton even kept me saying that part about you, but... Yeah. Anyway, Tim Curtis, so we get this description of how these special forces, I'm going to call them special forces, were basically rallied to go take on this ship. And they're wherever they are, somewhere else in Australia. And they're like, all right, we're going to start planning this mission. They're like, nope, here's your plane tickets on Qantas Airlines.
Yeah. And they're using like a map from the plane. They were like, we're sitting in like 35F and like trying to plan this like secret mission.
Yeah, they have the in-flight magazine with the map in the back. That's how they're plotting out what they're going to do.
And there was this funny story. I actually don't know if it was Ben or Tim. He was like, oh, I was just starting to see a girl and I was actually supposed to pick her up from the airport in like an hour and I was going to meet her parents for the first time and I had to like ring her and be like, hey, I can't meet you. And she was like, why? And he's like, I have to go. Where? I can't tell you. For how long? I can't tell you. Like, she was like, all right. He was like, it really wasn't like a great start. They are now married though.
Married with 2 kids. Actually, I was going to just mention this real quickly. So these guys are in one of the bonus episodes, which is just like an extended version of the interview we hear in the episode. So we're not going to cover the bonus episodes here. There's 3 of them. And that's basically what they are, is that some of the people that we get interviewed, it's just like a half an hour long version of that interview. So you get a little bit more context. But those guys are great.
And they have their own podcast.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
They do.
I did find that they used some words that I was like, the what now? They said board the frigate. I was like, what the fuck's a frigate?
Frigate's just another word for ship. It's a type of ship.
And then there was like this, like we could hear like some of the communication that was happening between the Pong Su and the Australians. And there was like a lot of seemingly delay tactics made by the Pong Su. It was kind of a bit mad. But then they board eventually. It was so sad.
Yeah, I mean, they were worried that there was going to be a lot of resistance, but really there wasn't. It was basically the crew. It was interesting that they mentioned that the crew was basically men in their 20s or men in their 60s, nothing in between.
No in between.
And then, so no real resistance. The master's son had to receive medical care. He had like a heart condition. They described some of the things on the ship that I thought were pretty interesting. Like in every cabin, there was like a 1 meter by 1 meter picture of the North Korean leaders. There were two giant pictures, and also most of the men had these lapel pins that had their picture on them. Yeah,
I thought that was interesting. Like the idea of the loyalty that was behind it. Like even when they were taking the things off the ship, and they put the picture upside down.
Yeah.
So the picture of the former leader was like facing the ground, and like there was like you could see people getting like visibly like distraught about this. Like you can't, like basically you can't do that.
I wanted to mention too, there's a YouTube, if you go on YouTube and you look for footage of things related to the Pong Su, there is a I think it's one of the crew members where the Australian police officers are kind of going through what they confiscated from him, and the lapel pin is in like a evidence bag, and you can see how agitated he is. He's talking through a translator, and he's basically like, I need to wear that pin, like I need to have that pin on me, and she's like, no, like we're not going to give this to you, like that's like, and she's very polite and she's very respectful, but she's like also like, you can't have this pin, and he I mean, they're all like this. Like it meant so. He basically says like that's like my heart. Like I need that on me.
What you did mention, I want to go back to it for a second. How there was mostly older, like kind of in their 60s, and in their 20s, people in their 20s. Why do you think that was?
Oh, that's a good question.
I have thoughts on it, but I was.
What are your thoughts? I didn't actually think about why. I just thought it was an interesting fact.
So, I was like, again, I know very little about this, but I wonder whether men in their 20s are more susceptible to like blind belief of what they've been raised with, maybe more radical if they've been like raised in this kind of regime. They've known no different. And then men in their 60s would have so much to lose by leaving because their families would be impacted so poorly. So I was wondering whether like in the in-between, like 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe a bit more like life experience as much as you could have, but maybe like less naivety about how well they're being treated.
Maybe. I mean, that's also supposing that they had choice in the matter, right? Like, which we don't know.
But even if they didn't have choice, why would they be chosen to be there, I suppose?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good, I don't know.
Like, I could be totally off. I'd love to hear if anyone listening has any other thoughts on why that might have been. Anything that you're not thinking about, that'd be good to hear.
Yeah, and one related thing that we get near the end of this episode, then we can move on to the next one, is the feds are wondering, okay, so we're talking about, like, Wong was the one who with his friend was on the boat carrying the heroin to shore. Was he special forces? Was he North Korean special forces? And, like, who's the guy that you entrust to put on a little boat with 150 kilograms, like $160 million worth of heroin? Like, is it someone who you have like extremely blackmailed, like you're holding his family hostage, or like, or does it need to be someone who is like one of your super soldiers? He didn't seem that way, right? Like he seemed like a scared guy, but yeah, why? Who's the person who gets that job? Yeah,
that's interesting.
All right, 6,
and it's episode 6 is called Hidden Forces. So I've like an overarching plot and then a summary, and my overarching plot is who knew what, when, and who knew what and when is the overarching plot, I think, of this episode.
That's funny. My one sentence summary, it's actually 2 sentences technically, was North Korean government behind the Pong Su? Probably.
So, yeah, I think like that kind of sums it up. We're really interesting. Definitely the two most interesting parts of this episode. First of all, we hear from Faye Young Ho, who is currently living in South Korea, or was at the time of the recording. He was previously a deputy ambassador, based in the UK. I'm saying all of this and I'm looking at you to confirm.
Oh, yeah, you're right. He was a deputy ambassador to the UK.
Deputy ambassador to the UK, and he defected. He would likely be, they mentioned, like top of the hit list, for anyone in North Korea. He spoke about Division 39, which I thought was interesting, which is basically like the economic, the division or cabinet or room that like
It's the
their
Royal Slush Fund, really.
yeah. So their whole job is to make money for the Jung family by any means. And
Can
so we
I?
get to hear a bit more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple things about this that I want to talk about. This was to me was the most interesting thing in this episode. Did you? So this was news to you, right? So it's room 39, office 39, division 39. It goes by a bunch of names. It's always 39.
I know nothing.
So they mention how it generates about $500 million a year for the leadership of North Korea. One of the things they mentioned in this episode is how one of the things they're really good at is counterfeiting U.S. money. Like, I guess there's been
Specifically $100 bills.
Yeah, that are like, like the thing on the U.S. bills where like the threads like change color as you like angle the dollar or like put it in light. Like they were able to recreate that, which I think is one of the really hard things to do. But they also like, I went and did a little research on this, and so I mean, like you said, any means necessary. This includes gold marketing, like human trafficking. Certainly, drugs is a big part of this. I read this article that I can include in the show notes that mentioned one of the things. So this episode is about heroin, but this article talked about meth and how one of the ways they make money is that for people in North Korea, they essentially get the meth for people who are maybe have cancer or are sick in some way. Where meth is effectively their only form of medication. Actually, in 2019, the New York Times reported that crystal meth was apparently a trendy Lunar New Year's present. And some defectors have noted that crystal meth is a really popular birthday or holiday gift in North Korea, which is really sad. Like, that's...
You get your kicks where you can, I suppose.
I guess so. Yeah.
The other interesting thing in this episode was we hear about the political secretary who was on board the Pong Su.
This is
kind
Troy.
of, yeah. So it kind of depicts, or some believe that it shows the government link between the ship and North Korea, but Kim Jong Il denied any link to the ship. They all seem to keep a tight script, even the political secretary. They were basically like, we've nothing to do with North Korea. We're a privately owned shipping company, which is bizarre because they speak about how you can't own anything.
Yeah, it's
privately.
a communist country. No, nothing's private, right?
So
The state owns everything.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting and just raised questions as well. So I do like that this is like nested in the middle and it's called Hidden Forces. This episode, I'll come back to why I like that in a little while.
All right,
so then we go on to episode 7. You need a lawyer. So my summary here is, how nice are people? Jack the lawyer, Jacko, and Noah.
Yeah,
like
some real friendly
trials
folks.
Yeah, 2 trials begin and the Jacks like to help, apparently. Go on.
Well, yeah, so Jack is this just like seemingly regular lawyer in Australia who hears about
petty
the
crimes.
Pong Su.
Deals with petty crimes.
And he's just like, these guys seem like they could use a good lawyer. So hence the name of the episode, You Need a Lawyer. But also like he just sends off a letter to the embassy and is like, hey, I'll be your lawyer. And then just these dudes in suits show up, claim to be the private owners of the Pong Su, and are like, all right, you're hired.
It's spoken about how like anyone arrested in this whole incident were like the nicest inmates. Well, this is talking about the they're all the nicest. Yeah, the crew in general are the nicest inmates, like no bother to anyone. And then they're speaking about the Pong Su's private owners. So seemingly there's 7 co-owners. The thought is that they're like informers of North Korea, pretending to be owners of the shipping company, or some people allegedly believe this. And one person they speak about a lot is Nam, and the other one is Hack Bomb, which like it's a pretty cool name.
it's just he's described on the podcast website as a North Korea watcher. He's someone who is just like interested in North Korea. His wife is from, I think, South Korea, so he speaks a little bit of Korean. He just seems like
yeah.
sort of like a good Samaritan.
Oh.
Jack the lawyer took Hackbaum, the
Jack
owner.
the lawyer liked them so much that he like was showing them around. He even brought them to meet his parents. First of all, I think the interesting thing is like, so we're talking about two cases here. The first one is against Lee, Tang, Lam, and Wong. They all plead guilty. It is interesting to note here that it was found out that Lee is not in fact Lee. His name was actually Tan. I really appreciated how they kept calling him Lee throughout the show, though, just to, for cohesiveness, that made it way more understandable. He was previously arrested in Denmark and escaped from prison, seemingly by like chipping away at the cement between the blocks. Tang got over 20 years, with parole only possible after 15. It meant he'd never see his elderly parents again, and he wouldn't see his 6-year-old son grow up. He's now back in Malaysia with his family. And then the second trial that's happening is the Pong Su crew. So this is with Jack the lawyer is representing them. Interesting note here. The idea was that Nam and Hackbaum, who were seemingly co-owners of the shipping company, the belief was they were there to to keep an eye on how things were going, sent from North Korea. This was the idea. But what was also interesting within this case is apparently Hackbaum gave the crew list to the prosecution and the defense that showed that there was 30 crew members at one point, at the starting point, and then at some point it was up to 32. So the thought is that this could have been Wong and the man who passed away, who we never hear his name.
Yeah.
We haven't so far heard his name. And in May 2004, Master Son, the chief mate and the head engineer were committed to trial. So the first case was to determine whether they were worthy of being committed to trial. The rest got off and were deported. The political secretary technically got off here, as in it was advised that they shouldn't pursue a case against him. But the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, decided to put the political secretary on trial, which it seemed like a significant move in a way, because it was sort of trying to say that if they're pursuing him, that North Korea was in fact involved.
Yep. All right. Episode 8.
Yeah. How are we doing?
All right. Episode 8 is called The Defector's Choice. And what's your summary of this one?
Fei Young Ho's life before and after defecting, plus the processing of chemicals, which...
Yeah. Same.
So confusing, the mix. But anyway, tell me.
Yeah, I think so. Tae Young Ho's story, this is similar to that book, The Girl with Seven Names, that I read, where you hear about someone who has some knowledge of what life is like outside of North Korea. So these are upper class people in North Korea, and just the impossible choice they face. I feel like this is worth further reading if you're interested in this topic. And like I said, there's lots of books by defectors, and just to think about, I feel like you hear about someone defecting, you think, oh, they're just trying to make their own lives better. And you don't think about all of the ripple effects of that, right? In Tae Young Ho's story, he wanted a better life for his children. And so he wanted to take his family out. And in other stories that I've read, you've got people who basically manage to smuggle their own children out, but they stay behind. And for those who stay behind, or those who are left behind, they could get executed. They could get sent to basically forced labor camps for the rest of their lives. You're basically sacrificing anyone who leaves behind with the most severe punishment. And you just have to make that choice, right? You have to decide, am I gonna, in Tae Young Ho's case, it's all right, I want my children to have an opportunity to live a better life. But Tae Young Ho had a brother and a sister, and they're left behind. You can't possibly get all of your connections, all of your family out. And when the government finds out what you've done, especially someone like him, someone who is high profile within the country, like
Yeah.
it's such a terrible choice you have to make.
Yeah. So even when he spoke about like it was because of his kids and like, you know, he delved into that, I was like, wow, that's kind of fascinating, and that kind of really tugs on my heartstrings. And he was also saying like it was so hard because I kind of realized that my last 50 years of existence, everything I've worked towards, I've failed because I've been following something that isn't right.
Yeah.
I never thought of his family, like his siblings, and like the impact on them. So when he mentioned that, I literally have, oh my God, his family. Like I cannot even comprehend how hard that decision must be.
Which is how this whole system works, right? Like it's the same thing for the guys on the ship, the guys that are sent to Australia. Like the government basically has you live under this threat of whoever it is you love, whoever it is that's important to you in your life that is still back in North Korea, they're under threat, right? Like that's the whole system is sort of predicated on that sort of like that retribution, and you have to decide like that, and that's why people go and take part in these drug runs, right? Like that's why some of these guys were probably on that ship, was to protect their family who were under threat at home. So the other thing we get is an analysis of the heroin. So we get Professor Bryn Hibbert, who's apparently his job is to look at heroin and determine where it came from, which it's quite a job.
Mad.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things I thought about this heroin was it had this logo on it.
Yeah.
This double UO brand, which is sort of indicative of like a high quality heroin. Apparently there's, you know, like brand name heroin. Dee, maybe you knew about this. I didn't.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. But that logo was forged. So there's like forged logos in the heroin trade. Of course there are. I don't know why there wouldn't be. But they can't quite place all of the bits and pieces, like what this was cut with. I guess they're usually like finding elements, traces of things that they can link back to Mexico or Afghanistan or different parts of the world. But they think maybe it was grown. Some of this was grown in North Korea.
And then apparently many defectors have mentioned the state-run poppy fields that exist in North Korea, which was interesting.
Definitely interesting.
The chemicals part to me, like, I don't know, in one ear out the other. I didn't really. The logo thing was interesting. I just was like, sure. There was mention of Dong. Was he was the sending letters to the Australian authorities?
Oh, I didn't write down his name. Yeah. Where was that? Oh, they were planning the hunger. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And like saying like, oh yeah, they're planning the hunger strike and they're doing this and they're doing this. So he was sending letters to the Australian authorities, and he says like to keep questioning the political secretary. And then he ends up being returned, like deported and sent back to North Korea. I'm like, why are we openly talking about this?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't know what happened to these guys, right? Like these
I know,
26
but like
crew. What?
I just was like, why are they mentioning it?
Yeah, because the presumption is, and it's never confirmed, but like nothing good's going to happen to these guys, right? Like they're not going to go back and live happy lives.
No.
Yeah.
No.
All right, should we get to episode 9?
Yeah, the most free they'd ever be. Like, what a sad title.
Yeah, so my summary of this is basically the trial of Secretary Choi, Master's son, and the 2 engineers from the ship. So these 4 of the crew who were kept behind. It's a 7-month trial, and just to tell the end first, they're all found not guilty, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
A couple cool bits from this episode. What did you have?
Yeah. So I was trying to figure out the reason behind this. So there was 13, by the end of it, there was like 13 members of the jury, and they had to remove one of them. So they like balloted who to remove. I presume that's in case like someone got sick or like whatever. They always have like an extra, like a buffer.
Yeah.
But there was one juror who seemingly was quite clearly like unimpressed by the defense at points during it. And when it was balloted, she was removed. And she was distraught, apparently, being removed. So this was baffling. Have you any idea like what the process is for like this, like when they say like it was balloted? Like who's deciding?
I mean, I don't know the Australian law. I know a little bit about how it works in the U.S., where it's not, and I think they mentioned this. It ended up being 13, but there were more originally, and like one by one, people dropped out for various reasons. And I think a similar thing happens here, where they need 12 people, but they might have, I don't know the number, maybe 15, maybe they have a whole like, extra 5 to 10 people, because over the course of a long trial, things will come up. But how they chose that person to be the one who gets left out. Like, think about I mean, aside from the sort of what's going on in the case, just the fact that this person spent 7 months watching this trial, being basically a juror, and then you don't get to actually take part in the one thing the jury does at the end. Like, that's just that on its own has to be so frustrating. To feel like you've basically kind of like wasted all that time.
Do you think that's what it was?
No, I think that person has very strong opinions about the case, but I think it was compounded by, I mean, 7 months is a long trial.
Do you think that the person had very strong feelings about the case and knew the rest of them didn't?
Maybe. I mean, how much are the jurors talking to each other as the case goes on? I mean, I imagine over 7 months, some amount, right?
So, as you were said, they were found not guilty. And then there's like this whole thing about how like the defense and the seemingly the co-owners of the Pong Su were out celebrating.
Got
Jack
some whiskey.
and Co brought them touristing around. They were given like a bridging visa for like a week, so they went and did some like touristy stuff. Master Son gave a tapestry to Jack the lawyer, and and then the flip side of that, Daz and Celeste and the rest of them were all like left deflated, and
they were deflated, but they also seemed like there were several people who were like, you know, the real winner
didn't
in
have
this
enough.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, you continue.
Oh, I forget who it was who said this, but basically saying like the real winner in this case was the Australian justice system.
Yeah.
That like democracy was on display here, which just seemed like a real brighter side of life kind of moment of like you invest all this time, all this energy to catch these guys committing this crime, and then you're like, you know what? Justice really shined here. Like, okay, all right.
Do you know what justice didn't shine on? The Pong Su on March 23rd of that year. What the hell? It was set adrift and it was blown up by fighter planes. Why?
Sure was.
What an environmental mess.
I want to say this is a video worth watching on YouTube. I watched it a couple of times. It's only like a minute or two long, but yeah, they sure did. They had a fighter jet come over and
Wild.
blow it to pieces. Yeah.
Wild. All right, so that was that. My summary: the lads. That's it.
Wait, what did you say?
The lads.
Oh, the lads. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So some of this was confusing, like, and then some of it was really cute, and then some of it was really heartbreaking. So we're talking, first of all, we get introduced, like, Richard ends up speaking to Wong on the phone, Richard being the host. He'd been introduced to Wong by Krish Koch. He had served time in jail because he ended up like in a fraud scheme where he was frauding people out of money, and like him and everyone else ended up with no money at the end, and he was brought to jail for 7 years. Richard Baker was actually talking to him about his story, and he said, I just happened to say, like, have you heard about the Pong Su? Like, did you know anyone? Did you meet anyone in there? Because he knew that he'd been in the same prison. And he was like, yeah, I had in fact become friends with Wong and Lee and
Wong and Lam.
Wong and Lam. Yes, thank you. For
Yep.
sake. So not a lot of
names.
names.
It's a lot of names.
I will say at the very start of this, I was like, what's happening here? Because the conversation between Chris and Wong sounded like a bit mad to me. But anyway, he basically talks about like being in prison with them and like how like, oh, they were so clean and they were so nice. And like, God, like I'd go up and buy them something in the shop thing and they'd be like mortified to take it. And like, it just wasn't in their custom. And his wife was coming in to see him and then sometimes went in to see them. And like she went up and hugged them after like hearing so much about them through Chris, and they were like bashful over like, well, seemingly a woman hugging them kind of thing. It was just really nice. It was like this, I felt like you got to see Wong and Lam through the like as people as opposed to like criminals. And he just said like they seemed like such stand-up people and like just very respectful and whatever.
Yeah, I thought that was great. They also, Wong apparently learned to make a really good chicken curry.
Yeah.
While in prison.
So
which,
Tuesdays were chicken curry night?
Yeah, love chicken curry night. That's
love it. It's a big fave in our house as well.
Yeah. So yeah, this is sort of just like the wrapping up the loose ends as we have them episode. We do get back to Dickie Davies. He
selling Pong Su t-shirts.
T-shirts and bumper stickers. I love the bumper sticker has the heroin logo on it and says the Pong Su Drowning Not Waving World Tour 2003.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, you could get the t-shirts in red or black. That was not an Australian accent.
It was some kind of accent. I don't know what that was.
It was more of a Dublin accent, I think.
Well, and again, we don't know really what happened to a lot of people, and we get a little bit of information, including about Wong's friend, the one who died on the beach at the very beginning of this story. We get the coroner's assessment. We find out that he ended up being buried with no name. And Wong tried to get his remains. Wong was about to get out of prison and thought, well, let me try to get his remains, but because they never had any identity, they couldn't release him. Like they needed a nationality, they needed some type of like connection to a family, and they never got that.
Yeah. And the other thing that was interesting here is we hear how Jack the lawyer was brought to North Korea, funded apparently by the North Korean shipping company.
Right. Shipping company.
Shipping company. Could you hear the air quotes in my voice, anyone?
Yeah.
And he saw Master's son and that group, and he said they were great and they went out for dinner and it was all fabulous.
Good barbecue.
And they had great barbecue. Noah was also there, and he asked could he see some of the old crew members, and they were told they weren't allowed to. Apparently ordinary people can't mix with foreigners, but obviously Master's son isn't deemed an ordinary person, presumably because he's so high up. I don't know.
Yeah, and this tracks, I mean, some of the elements of their story track with, I feel like everything else I've read about when people go, like outsiders go to North Korea, that they are treated very hospitably. They are sort of wined and dined, but also kept on kind of a very short leash about who they're able to interact with, where they're able to go. We hear about that in this episode, that yes, you can go. Yes, you can meet some people, but maybe not. Like you can't ask too many questions.
Yeah. And then the question is posed by the host, like what happened to the ship's crew when they got back to North Korea? And some people kind of informed Des and his group that they likely would have been executed. So there was speculation, or it was like touted as an idea that like maybe North Korea would have seen what happened they would have put the blame on the crew for North Korea losing face in like global eyes, because they're now linked to like heroin trading, even though it was never actually proven that there was any link between North Korea and the Pong Su. And that would have been deemed bad enough to warrant a severe punishment such as execution.
Yeah, I feel like the takeaway is we don't know, but that's the general presumption. I think we hear that from several people, including Tae Young Ho, that's probably what happened. But we'll probably never know.
And then it pivots back to like Wong and Lam. And Chris, like, when he was in prison, he ended up like doing a lot of like research into law and legal stuff and tried to help like different people. And he was helping them like get passports because they didn't have any passports. And apparently, kind of secretly, North Korea got them passports.
Yeah.
Which was kind of like, oh, they're North Korean. Right.
Right. If we had known that before, would have kind of changed a lot of things in the case.
Yeah. So the day that they're due to leave, Chris tried to call them on their cell phones, mobile phones, and the phone was disconnected. That was it.
Yeah.
And then it pans back to that phone call of like him saying like, oh, they might put you on a plane and I'll never hear from you again.
Which is how it ends. Yeah.
What happens. Yeah.
All right.
Already.
And that was our episode by episode recap of episodes 2 through 9 of The Last Voyage of the Pong Su. If you are eager to hear us share our thoughts on that, and you're listening to this episode before you've listened to our full recap episode, go check out our full recap episode. We skip over this whole bit of going in detail through each episode and just get right to our thoughts on this series.
Don't forget to join us on Patreon. Patreon.com/so much crime, so little time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.